Aftershock is a new novel by Canada-based Chinese author Zhang Ling. Zhang Ling is a respected and celebrated Chinese author who has won multiple awards for her short stories and her novels, and I confess I've never read her until now. This book was also translated into English by Shelley Bryant, who did a really fantastic job translating the importance and the emotional heft of this incredible story. Aftershock is a story shattered into pieces, and we watch on as our protagonist tries to put those pieces back together. The way those pieces are represented is by a lack of chronology. The novel doesn't just jump around through time, it also jumps from perspective to perspective. And so there is a wonderfully disjointed sense to everything. And while the novel isn't told chronologically, the chapters still have a clear line running through them in a more emotional sense. And so it's difficult to say that this has any kind of 3-act or 5-act structure, but it still has the recognizable emotional arc of a more standard novel because of the way the chapters are emotionally connected together. It's really amazing plotting. As for what it's about, Aftershock centers around an earthquake that happened in 1976 in Tangshan, China. This earthquake really happened, and it measured a 7.9 on the Richter scale, and it caused the deaths of 242,000 people in the city of Tangshan. It was an almost incalculable tragedy, and it is the linchpin of this novel. When we begin, our protagonist, Xiao Deng, is a pretty successful author. She's in her mid-30s, she's married with a child, she lives in Toronto, Canada. Her husband also used to be a novelist, a very, very well-respected one in China. And they've been living in Canada now for quite a while, but her mental health is not doing well. She is falling apart, mentally and physically. And in the novel's opening chapter, we get to know her current mental state and the psychiatrist who is helping her. The discussion she has with her psychiatrist leads us back in time to slowly build the pieces of her life. Because she grew up in Tangshan, and she survived the earthquake. But we have so many missing pieces when it comes to her relationship to that earthquake, to that city, and most importantly, to her family. So when we first jump back, we actually jump over her birth, all the way back to the young life of her mother. Xiao Deng's mother grew up through the Cultural Revolution. She was poor, she was hungry, she married a man and had a family. And we get a really clear picture of everything these two went through, the 2 children that they had, Xiao Deng being one of them, and them settling in Tangshan. Eventually we get to the earthquake itself, but as I said, we do jump around back and forth. Occasionally we move back to present-day Toronto. We see that Xiao Deng's family is falling apart as well. Her husband is having an affair. Her daughter does not like her, they do not get along. And the main reason for that seems to be that Xiao Deng is suffocating her child out of fear. She's a very insecure and therefore very controlling parent. It doesn't make her a bad person, it just shows what the scars and trauma that she's gone through have done to her as a parent. So there's a lot to digest here emotionally, and I'm sure there is going to be so much that people resonate with as they read. Xiao Deng's role as a mother, her life as an immigrant in Canada, and most importantly, her childhood, her past. It's kind of difficult to know where the line is when it comes to spoilers because this novel jumps around a lot. Xiao Deng survived the earthquake, but a lot of difficult things came next. And from here, the jumps between characters kind of increase. We return occasionally to her mother's perspective, we get her brother's perspective, but through the events of the earthquake, Xiao Deng was also adopted. We learn this kind of early on, when Xiao Deng mentions to her husband and her psychiatrist that she has both a mother and an adopted mother, both of whom she says are dead. We don't know the details, we don't know if that's accurate, and here I'd like to bring up one complaint that I have, and it's not about the text itself at all. I honestly think Aftershock is pretty flawless. The complaint I have is about the blurb, and I've done this before. I quite often take issue with blurbs. They either give away too much, not enough, or they're inaccurate, and I would say that this blurb is kind of inaccurate. Halfway through the blurb it says Xiao Deng realizes the only path toward healing is to return to Tangshan, find her mother, and get closure. But as I said at the beginning, we think her mother is dead. And I am going to spoil something and tell you that this return to Tangshan happens in the final 10 pages of the book. Reading this blurb, you think that she's going to be back in Tangshan, maybe for the second half of the book. Her returning is her big thing. The novel will be about her journey back, her facing her past, facing her family, facing her trauma, facing the earthquake and what it did to everyone. No, that's not accurate. I feel like it's reasonable to assume that that's what I would expect from the novel based on how the blurb phrases it, but no. She's back in Tangshan for literally the last 10 pages of this 200-page novel, so the final 5%. I don't think they should have mentioned it in the blurb because I kind of waited for it to happen. The novel isn't really about her returning home. It's about her life. It is a broken, shattered, disjointed narrative about a woman's mother, about her childhood, about her family, about her husband, about her immigration, her university years, her having a child, her becoming a novelist. It's her entire life. We get a wonderful, if broken, picture of this whole life. We get other perspectives too, as I said, and they are all fascinating. They all serve to add colour to this picture. With just Xiaodeng, the picture would feel kind of black, white and grey. As we get to know her mother's life beforehand, that adds a splash of colour. As we get to know what happened to her brother afterwards, more colour is added, and it's really, really beautifully done. As I said, the novel is only about 200 pages long, the chapters are relatively short, and they sometimes kind of feel like diaries. It's not written in an epistolary style, but it has that feeling, that effect on the reader. You feel like you are a voyeur in her life, and the intimacy with which everything is written really escalates that. Aftershock, as I said before, is a powerful novel that's going to hit readers very, very differently depending on who you are and where you come from. If you've ever struggled through a natural disaster or any kind of upheaval, if you are a parent who knows they've made mistakes, or if you are a child who knows their parents have made terrible mistakes, if you're an immigrant or you understand the immigrant experience, there are a lot of things in this book that are going to hit you in certain ways. Most of all for me was just struggles with mental illness. I am someone who has struggled with anxiety and depression for all of my adult life, and the feelings that she conjures here, the trauma that she goes through, the way that she works through it with her therapist, the way that it affects and damages and maybe breaks entirely her marriage and her relationship to her daughter, I felt that. Being a depressed person is difficult not just for yourself, but for the people around you. Speaking as someone who is sometimes depressed, I know that being depressed hurts other people. Depressed people are hard to be around. And as a result, her husband is cheating. Does that make it morally okay that he's doing that? No, but we do get a really good insight into him. We do get his perspective very, very early on. We meet the person he's cheating with in the early chapters. We learn about his life. We also, as I said earlier, learn that he used to be a novelist, his wife is currently a novelist, and we want to know why he isn't anymore. What changed in his life? What changed in hers? What was the catalyst for this shift? Jealousy plays a part in their marriage just as much as depression does. We're learning all of this while also learning about an earthquake and how it broke a family apart when Xiaodeng was only a child. There's a lot to learn here, and it's only 200 pages long. By the end of it, you feel like you've lived a life with this woman, with her entire family. Both the family she's created and the family that she was born into and left behind. We learn why, we learn all these details. And coming out of the novel is disorientating. You forget where you are because you start to feel like you are her, or at least living alongside her as her companion. It's incredibly addictive, incredibly immersive, and emotionally exhausting in a good way. I am amazed by Aftershock, truly. I think it is a remarkable piece of fiction, a wonderful Chinese novel, and I really need you to check it out. Now it's time for my Patreon book recommendation of the week. This recommendation comes from Rachel, and she says, "A book I recently read and enjoyed is Different, Not Less by Chloe Hayden. This is a wonderfully written book that celebrates neurodiversity. Chloe Hayden does an excellent job at explaining how neurodivergent and disabled people in general need accessibility and a supportive community in order to thrive. Some of the information is not new to me, such as the fact that Asperger's syndrome is outdated and problematic, as well as how functioning labels are not helpful at all. The Disney references didn't interest me that much, but that is Chloe Hayden's special interest, so it's fine that she mentions her favourite Disney films. When it comes to the subject subject of neurodivergence, books and any kind of media written by neurodivergent people will always be more important and accurate than anything written by neurotypical/holistic experts. Thank you, Rachel. As a neurodiverse person myself, I have to admit I do not read enough books about neurodiversity by neurodiverse people, and I need to change that, so I think I'll start here. I'll check this out, you check out Aftershock, and subscribe for books.